I remember the exact moment when I realized my marriage to Emily was no longer a partnership, but a series of silent negotiations. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the world outside our house seemed to move on without us, and inside, everything felt suspended in a heavy, unspoken tension. Emily sat across from me at the dinner table, her sharp green eyes flickering with thoughts she never voiced, her chestnut hair pulled back in a way that made her look both elegant and distant. She always had this air about her, confident, almost untouchable, as if she was always one step ahead, playing a game whose rules only she understood. We had stopped talking about anything real months ago. Conversations about work, about our daughter's school, even about the weather felt rehearsed, like we were both reading from a script. But underneath it all, there was a current of something darker, resentment maybe, or regret. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that every marriage goes through rough patches, that if I just held on a little longer, things would return to normal. But deep down, I knew better. The first silent agreement came after an argument that neither of us wanted to have. Emily wanted to spend a weekend away with her friend Sarah, just the two of them, no questions asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust her, but because I felt like I was losing her inch by inch. She saw my hesitation and offered a compromise. She'd keep up the appearance of a happy wife, attend the family gatherings, play her part, if I gave her the freedom she was asking for. It was an unspoken deal, sealed with a look, not words. I nodded, and she smiled, just a little, just enough to let me know she'd won. From that moment on, our marriage became a series of these silent agreements. Emily would ask for more space, more time, more autonomy, and I would give in, hoping each concession would be the one that brought her back to me. But every time I gave her what she wanted, she seemed to drift further away. I told myself I was doing the right thing, being supportive, giving her room to breathe. But the truth was I was terrified, terrified of what would happen if I said no, terrified of what I might lose. Emily was always meticulous, organized to the point of obsession. She kept our home immaculate, her routines unbreakable, but lately I noticed small cracks in her perfect facade. She'd come home later than usual, her excuses vague and hurried. She'd spend hours on her phone, texting Sarah, her laughter echoing from behind closed doors. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid, but the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. Looking back, I can see how desperate I was to keep the peace, to avoid conflict at any cost. I became a master at swallowing my doubts, burying my suspicions under layers of denial. I told myself I was protecting our family, that I was being strong for our daughter, but the truth was I was weak. I was afraid to confront the reality that the woman I loved was slipping away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That was the beginning. The first in a long line of silent agreements, each one chipping away at the foundation of our marriage, leaving me more alone than I'd ever been. And I had no idea just how much further I would fall. It didn't take long for the subtle signs of Emily's manipulation to become impossible to ignore. I started to notice patterns, tiny inconsistencies in her stories, the way she'd dodge certain questions, or how her mood would shift after a message from Sarah. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Emily's job as a marketing manager was demanding, and Sarah, her childhood best friend, had always been her confidant. But the closeness between them seemed to intensify overnight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that their friendship had become a lifeline for Emily, a place where she could plot her next move away from me. Sarah was always around. She'd drop by unannounced, her laughter filling our kitchen as she and Emily whispered over coffee. Sometimes I'd walk in and they'd fall silent, exchanging glances that made me feel like an intruder in my own home. Sarah was the opposite. Of Emily, outspoken, impulsive, with a mischievous glint in her blue eyes. I used to appreciate her energy, but now it felt like she was fueling Emily's growing restlessness, encouraging her to push boundaries I never thought we'd cross. One evening, I overheard them talking in hushed voices on the back patio. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough to know they were discussing more than weekend plans. "You deserve to be happy, Em," Sarah said, her voice low but urgent. "You can't keep living like this." Emily didn't argue. She just nodded, her face set in determination. That night, she barely spoke to me, retreating to our bedroom with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The distance between us grew with every passing day. Emily started working late more often, claiming last-minute meetings or networking events. She'd come home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, her eyes bright and her cheeks flushed. When I asked about her day, her answers were clipped, rehearsed. "Just work," she'd say, brushing me off with a smile that never reached her eyes. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt gnawed at me, eating away at whatever trust we still had. I began to feel like a ghost in my own life. Our daughter, Lily, picked up on the tension, asking why Mommy was always busy, why she didn't tuck her in at night anymore. I didn't have answers. I tried to fill the void, taking on more at home, hoping that if I could just hold everything together, Emily would come back to us. But she was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't talk to anyone about what was happening, not my friends, not my family. I was ashamed of my suspicions, afraid they'd think I was paranoid or, worse, that I'd failed as a husband. So I kept it all inside, replaying every conversation, every look, every touch, searching for clues I might have missed. I started, checking her phone when she left it unattended, scrolling through texts that were always deleted, call logs that seemed too clean. The secrecy was suffocating. One night, after Emily left for another work trip, I found a receipt in her purse for a hotel across town. The date matched a night she said she was at a conference. My hands shook as I stared at the slip of paper, the truth pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was terrified of what she might say, of what I already knew deep down. Sarah's influence became more obvious too. She'd text Emily late at night, their conversations filled with inside jokes and cryptic references. I realized then that Sarah wasn't just a bystander, she was actively helping Emily orchestrate her escape. The two of them were building a world where I didn't belong, and I was left standing on the outside, watching my marriage unravel thread by thread. That was when I understood. Emily wasn't just drifting away. She was being pulled, step by step, into a life where I was nothing more than an obstacle to her freedom. And the worst part was, I was letting it happen, too afraid to fight for what we once had. Emily's requests for freedom became more frequent and more specific. It started with small things: dinners out with Sarah, weekends away, evenings spent working late. But soon she wanted more. She wanted to travel alone, to spend holidays apart, to take on projects in other states. Each time she asked, she framed it as a necessity for her own happiness, her own growth. "I just need some space, David," she'd say, her voice calm but unwavering, her green eyes locked on mine as if daring me to refuse. "This isn't about you, it's about me finally living my life." I tried to reason with her, to remind her of our family, our daughter, the life we'd built together. But Emily had become an expert at negotiation. She'd offer reassurances, promising to keep up appearances, to be the perfect wife and mother in front of everyone else. "No one has to know," she'd whisper. "We can still look like the perfect couple. Just let me have this." It was a pact of silence, her freedom in exchange for my complicity. I agreed, again and again, each time hoping it would be enough to satisfy her, to bring her back to us. But every concession felt like a defeat. A little piece of myself surrendered. I stopped asking questions, stopped pressing for details. I told myself I was being supportive, that I was giving her the trust she needed, but in reality, I was just too scared to face the truth. I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, she'd leave for good, and I'd be left with nothing. The arrangement became routine. Emily would leave for days at a time, always with a plausible excuse and a carefully rehearsed story. She'd text me updates, photos of hotel rooms and conference halls, snapshots of dinners with colleagues. But something about her messages felt off, too polished, too curated. When she was home, she was distant, distracted. She'd smile for Lily, help with homework, attend family events, but it was all surface level, a performance for the world to see. I tried to fill the growing emptiness with work, with chores, with anything that kept my mind occupied. But the silence in our house was deafening. I missed the way things used to be. The easy laughter, the shared dreams, the feeling that we were in this together. Now it felt like I was living with a stranger, someone who wore my wife's face but no longer shared her heart. Sarah's role in all of this became clearer. She was Emily's confidant, her co-conspirator. They'd planned trips together, cover for each other, create alibis that I was expected to accept without question. Sometimes I'd overhear them laughing about something I wasn't meant to understand, their voices low and conspiratorial. I realized then that I was no longer part of their world. I was just an obstacle, a necessary inconvenience. One night, Emily sat me down at the kitchen table. She looked tired, but resolute. "David, I need to take a job in Chicago. It's a big opportunity, and I'll be gone for a couple of weeks at a time. I need you to be okay with this." Her tone left no room for argument. She promised it was temporary, that it wouldn't change anything between us. But I knew better. This was the next step in her plan, another boundary pushed, another test of how much I was willing to give up to keep her. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I was being strong, that I was doing what was best for our family, but deep down, I knew I was just delaying the inevitable. Emily was slipping away, and no amount of compromise could bring her back. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized how much I had lost. Not just Emily, but myself, my confidence, my sense of security, my belief in the life we'd built. I was trapped in a pact of silence, complicit in my own unhappiness, and I didn't know how to break free. All I could do was wait, hoping that somehow things would change. But a part of me knew that the worst was yet to come. The unraveling of Emily's plan began with a single, careless mistake. She had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter one morning, a rare oversight for someone as meticulous as her. I wasn't looking for trouble, but as I reached for my keys, a notification popped up. A message from Sarah, the preview reading, "He has no idea, everything's set for next week." My heart froze. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the curiosity and dread gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I opened her email. What I found shattered the last illusions I had about our marriage. There were dozens of messages between Emily and Sarah, but also with someone named Mark, a name I didn't recognize. The tone was intimate, familiar, and the details left no doubt. Emily was having an affair. The trips to Chicago weren't for work, they were rendezvous with Mark, carefully orchestrated and covered by Sarah's alibis. There were hotel confirmations, dinner reservations, and even shared photos, private moments that should have belonged to us, now tainted by betrayal. I felt sick. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of correspondence, watching the progression, from cautious flirting to open declarations of love. I saw how Sarah had coached Emily, helping her craft excuses and manipulate me into granting more freedom. The realization that I had been played, not just by my wife, but by her closest friend, was almost unbearable. Every concession I'd made, every silent agreement, had only made it easier for her to live this double life. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the cold, calculated way Emily had gone about it. She had mapped out every step, from the initial requests for space to the eventual plan for separation. In one email, she even discussed meeting with a family lawyer, someone named Jonathan Miller, to prepare for the transition. She wanted to ensure custody arrangements for Lily and protect her financial interests. I realized then that Emily's search for independence was never about self-discovery. It was about escape, about building a new life without me, piece by piece. While I stood by, blind and compliant, I spent the next few days in a fog, barely able to function. I went through the motions at work, pretended everything was fine for Lily, but inside I was unraveling. Every moment Emily was away, I wondered where she really was, who she was with, what lies she was telling. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage was gone, replaced by suspicion and heartbreak. When Emily returned from her latest business trip, I couldn't look at her the same way. She noticed the change immediately. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with false concern. I wanted to scream to confront her with the evidence, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I nodded, swallowing the anger and humiliation that threatened to spill over. The next day, I received a letter from Jonathan Miller's office. It was official. Emily was preparing to file for separation. The letter was cold, clinical, outlining the steps ahead: mediation, custody discussions, division of assets. There was no mention of love, no acknowledgement of the years we'd spent together, just a list of legal procedures, as if our marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement to be dissolved. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the letter, trying to process the reality of what was happening. Emily was already asleep upstairs, her conscience apparently clear. I realized then that the woman I had loved, the woman I had sacrificed so much for, was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone capable of deception, manipulation, and cold calculation. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it, a new feeling began to take root: resolve. I couldn't change what Emily had done, but I could decide how I would respond. I wouldn't let her betrayal define me. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of determination. I would face what was coming, not as a victim, but as someone ready to reclaim his life. I waited 3 days before confronting Emily. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to prepare myself for the conversation that would change everything. It was a Friday evening when I finally found the courage. Lily was staying at my sister's, for the weekend, a small mercy, as I couldn't bear the thought of her witnessing what was about to unfold. Emily was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a dinner I knew she had no intention of sharing with me. Her movements were precise, methodical, just like everything else about her. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, trying to reconcile this woman with the one I had married 7 years ago. "I know about Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know about the lawyer, the separation plans. I know—" "Everything, Emily." She froze, the knife suspended mid-air. For a split second I saw panic, flash across her face before she composed herself. She set the knife down slowly, deliberately, and turned to face me. Her green eyes, once so warm and inviting, were now cold and defensive. "How long have you known?" she asked, not bothering to deny it. "Long enough," I replied. "I saw your emails. I know about the trips, the hotels. I know Sarah's been covering for you. I know you've been planning this for months." Emily didn't flinch. She stood there, arms crossed, as if she'd been expecting this moment. "I was going to tell you," she said, her voice flat, "after I had everything in order." "Everything in order," I repeated, incredulous. "You mean after you'd secured your escape route? After you'd made sure you got what you wanted in the divorce? After you'd decided how much of our daughter's life I was allowed to have?" She had the decency to look away then, but her posture remained defiant. "I needed security, David. I needed to know I could stand on my own." "And you couldn't talk to me about that?" I asked, the hurt and anger rising in my chest. "You had to lie, to sneak around, to betray everything we built together?" "You wouldn't have understood," she said, her voice rising. "You never understood what I needed. You were always so content with this life, this routine." I was suffocating, David. I needed more. The words hit me like physical blows. "So instead of telling me that, you decided to manipulate me, to use my trust against me, to make me complicit in my own betrayal?" Emily's facade finally cracked. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice breaking. "I just wanted freedom. I wanted to feel alive again." "And Mark makes you feel alive?" I asked, the name bitter on my tongue. She didn't answer, but her silence told me everything. I felt a surge of anger, not just at her betrayal, but at the cold, calculated way she had orchestrated it all. "You know what hurts the most?" I said, my voice quiet now. "Not the affair, not even the lies. It's that you made me doubt myself. You made me think I was paranoid, controlling, unreasonable. You made me believe I was the problem." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or frustration at being caught. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Bullshit," I said, the word sharp in the quiet kitchen. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Every time you negotiated for more freedom, every time you made me feel guilty for questioning you, every time you used my love for you as a weapon, you knew." The silence between us stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. Emily looked smaller somehow, less formidable than the woman who had been systematically dismantling our marriage. "So what happens now?" she finally asked. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. "Now we stop pretending. No more silent agreements, no more manipulation. You want your freedom? Fine. But we're going to do this on terms that respect the years we had together, and most importantly, that protect our daughter." Emily nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. But I wasn't moved. I had spent too many nights crying alone, too many days questioning my sanity. I was done being the victim in her carefully constructed narrative. "I'll be staying at Mike's for a while," I said, referring to my oldest friend. "I need space to think, to figure out who I am without you, because somewhere along the way, I lost myself trying to keep you." As I turned to leave, Emily called out, "David, I did love you. I still do, in my way." I paused, considering her words. "Your way of loving was never enough, Emily, and now it's too late." The first night away from home was the hardest. Mike's guest room was clean but unfamiliar, and every sound in the house reminded me of what I'd left behind. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation with Emily over And over in my mind, the anger, the heartbreak, the relief, it all mixed together until I couldn't tell where one feeling ended and the next began. I wondered if I'd ever sleep soundly again, or if this ache in my chest would become my new normal. Mike tried to help in his own way. He didn't ask questions or offer advice unless I wanted it. Instead, he just sat with me, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a beer in hand, watching late-night TV. It was a small comfort, but it helped. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. I started to realize how much I'd isolated myself, how much I'd let Emily's needs and moods dictate every aspect of my life. I'd lost touch with friends, with hobbies, even with myself. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and difficult conversations. Jonathan Miller, the family lawyer, was professional and direct. He laid out the steps for separation, custody, and division of assets. It was all so clinical, so devoid of emotion, that I sometimes felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Emily was present for every meeting, composed and resolute. She never apologized, never tried to explain. She was focused on the future, her future, and I was just a formality to be navigated. Lily was the only thing that kept me moving forward. She was confused, of course, and scared. She asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't live together anymore, why everything had changed. I did my best to reassure her, to make her feel loved and safe, even as my own world crumbled. I promised myself I wouldn't let my pain become hers. No matter how much Emily and I disagreed, I refused to let Lily become a pawn in our conflict. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I reached out to old friends, reconnected with my brother, and took up running again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago. The physical exhaustion was a relief, a way to quiet my mind and remind myself that I was still alive, still capable of moving forward. I started seeing a therapist too, someone who helped me untangle the mess of guilt, anger, and grief that Emily had left behind. There were setbacks, of course. Nights when the loneliness was overwhelming, when I missed the sound of Lily's laughter in the hallway, or the way Emily used to curl up next to me on the couch. But there were good moments, 2 small victories that reminded me I was more than the sum of my failures. I learned to cook a few new dishes, helped Lily with her science project, even laughed at Mike's terrible jokes. The day the divorce papers were finalized, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was something close to peace. I realized that Emily's betrayal, as devastating as it was, didn't have to define me. I could choose what came next. I could choose to be more than just the man she left behind. Looking back, I see now that the silent agreements, the compromises, the pain, they were all part of a lesson I needed to learn. I learned that love without honesty is just an illusion, that freedom built on betrayal is never real. Most importantly, I learned that I am stronger than I ever thought possible. I survived the worst, and I came out the other side, not whole, but healing. My story isn't unique. There are thousands of people like me picking up the pieces after betrayal, learning to trust again, to hope again. If you're listening to this, if you're in that dark place, know that it does get better. The pain fades, the anger softens, and one day you'll wake up and realize that your life is yours again. And that in itself is a kind of freedom worth fighting for.